Hello and welcome to a new episode of Race Recap, where we provide you with all the key insights and crucial information from each weekend's feeder series action. My name's Thomas Groves, and this week on Race Recap, it's the long-awaited return of the F1 paddock and, of course, Formula 2. After 2 months off, we're all going to need a bit of a refresher, and here to help us deliver that and much more this week is none other than feeder series F2 editor Martin Lloyd. How you doing, Martin?
Yeah, really well, thank you, Thomas. Certainly much better for having some Formula 2 cars back on track.
Absolutely. I've got to say, Miami delivers a great F1 race, great F2 stuff as well. And coming into this weekend, though, it's tight. It was tight at the top of both championships. It still is. Reigning teams champions Invicta were 4 points ahead of Campos, or behind Campos, after the opening weekend in Australia, where Nico Solov had a 7-point lead ahead of Rafael Camara. Now, zoning in on Camara and Solov, we kind of mentioned them at the end of the last F2 show as kind of being the title favourites, perhaps. I think we saw quite an interesting weekend in terms of that development, didn't we?
Yeah, I'd agree. I think that Solov really showed both his pace and his racecraft in the sprint race. I think Camara could have, on another day, very very easily won that feature race. And I think both of them are looking like they have the pace to be up there towards the season's end. But I would also have a look at some of the other strong characters through this weekend and say, well, as much as they've had a lot of pace, Gabriele Mini winning that feature race and scoring in every race so far this season, which neither Solov nor Camara have done, that can't be ignored. Lawrence Van Hoopen was excellent. Again, I'm not saying he's definitely going to be able to go on a title charge, but to start putting consistent results together in Trident was outstanding. And then Dino Beganovic as well with another really strong drive to second place. So I think there was a lot of really impressive drives this weekend.
Yeah, and on your points that I noticed as well, it was even though we kind of had Solov and Camara as the top two, they only scored points in one of the two races in Australia. So they were great in their respective races, but it kind of meant that in the other one they kind of didn't show up as much. I think, it was actually, I noticed it was Tassanapol Infopuvasak who was the most consistent in Australia. Obviously, he kind of had a bit more of a difficult weekend here, but I do think, when you look at those guys who are going to start scoring points more consistently, and that's kind of what Solov and Cameron need to do if they're going to really establish themselves as title favourites. I think to that point, it's really, for Solov, it'll be really disappointing that he couldn't end up scoring points in race 2. He had that crash, which is really unfortunate, but I think a lot of guys were caught out in that wet race. I would like to throw in Joshua Dirksen because I think his race 1 pace and his race 1 showing was really good. We kind of saw it as a repeat of Australia where, Dirksen was the man on top for Invicta. He won that first race of the season. He then, could have won it this time round as well. I think the Camera, what he needs to do is try and sort out his sprint races because that's kind of been holding him back championship wise for me. But no, I think it's kind of opened the door a bit to everyone else. But for Solov, yeah, what a result in race 1. As you said, I was so impressed by his racecraft and his brilliant defense against Lawrence Van Hoopen. I think that's going to be something he'll take a lot of positives away from.
Yeah, I'd agree. And I think Dirksen could definitely be a contender. He was really, really racy in both races, even if it didn't quite work out points-wise for him this weekend. I also really wouldn't write off Rodin anytime soon. Alex Dunn, Martin Lloyd currently 12th and 17th in the standings, but both weekends they've been one of, if not the quickest team on the grid, and they've only got 16 points between them to show for it. That's not going to last too much longer. And I think, if anything, those non-scores for Camara and Solov this weekend, as well as being frustrating individually, where they missed opportunities, where Rodin didn't score as well as they'd have liked to. Perhaps they were.
Yeah, and of course we should mention as well, it is the first time F2 has visited North America and Miami. So apart from Gabriele Mini, I think in an FE test you mentioned before we started recording, pretty much it's new to everyone. So I think kind of they've had to not only adapt to a brand new track for F2 cars. We've never been to North America before. They've also had to adapt to quite an interesting, greasy, wet but not totally wet surface for that second race, which I think it just adds an increased level of difficulty for all those drivers. I mean, was there anyone that do you think who particularly coped well in those kind of changing conditions between the feature and the sprint?
Well, I think that not to say everybody was great because there was a certain amount of crashes. But I think um, everyone kind of made allowances for the fact that, okay, there were going to be some people missing braking points. There were going to be some spins because this was, as you say, not only a new track, but also very, very difficult conditions. I thought Alex Dunn was extremely quick until he wasn't. At the start of that feature race, I thought Dino Boganovic was very, very strong. And of course, Gabriele Mini winning that sprint race. I also thought Noel Leon came through the field really, really well to finish fourth, showing the kind of pace that we saw in the Melbourne sprint race as well. And there was an interview that I put out last week on feederseries.net with Noel. He was saying, yeah, I know I've got the pace and I've got the car to be at the front of the field. So it'll be really interesting to see if he can do that more often. But yeah, I agree. It was a real challenge for the drivers this weekend. And with a few exceptions, there were a few instances in the feature race. A lot of them really came out with a lot of credit in terms of handling that challenge. And I think the key point to emphasize here is, it's the first time F2 has visited North America. As you said, it's the first time most of these drivers had been here, with the exception of Melbourne and Jeddah and Qatar. Every one of these tracks, and Abu Dhabi, sorry, every one of these tracks, especially in the middle of the season, and usually at this point we might be going towards Imola and Monaco. Every one of these tracks has been driven by most of the field before in some kind of junior category. We come up to Barcelona, Spielberg, Silverstone, Hungary, Spa. These kinds of tracks are on, if not every single lower junior single-seater championship. They're all in Formula 3. So for this to be a complete new challenge for so much of the grid, but to still have so many impressive performances, I thought it was a really impressive weekend for the series.
Yeah, honestly, it's a testament to these drivers, especially because, as you said, I mean, I'd just be echoing you, but yeah, to come in here and put on the show that they did, two brilliant races to watch. I mean, I think we were all on the edge of our seats in that kind of last lap on the F2 feature where everyone went wide at the final corner and Mini comes through and snatches it right at the end. I mean, and I think it was also nice that in the sense that, yes, we kind of didn't see the same consistency we might have seen last week in Australia, but what it allowed us to do with the likes of Sullivan that not kind of showing up in this feature is that we got to see new guys at the front. We maybe hadn't seen this season. I think Boganovic is kind of one of those drivers I'd like to highlight. And yeah, to your point, I think we also saw a lot of new guys running up at the front. I saw Colton Herter and John Bennett were running like P2, P3 before the safety car in that second race, which, it's great for them to get that kind of experience of being at the head of the field. Because I think they haven't really had a chance to do so far in their respective FC careers. But yeah, of course, next week is Canada. We're continuing in North America for a while. But when you think about what this weekend's done with the championship, we're still very early in there. Of course, it's only 2 weekends down. We've got plenty of racing to go. But who do you think is going to be feeling a bit more confident perhaps after this weekend, and who do you think might be feeling the need to turn it up a little bit in come Canada?
Well, I'm looking at MP Motorsport as a team that has really shown what they're about. They're a team that we know can compete at the front regularly, but I think getting that first win of the season, first feature race win of the season, in such difficult conditions with a driver who's new to the team, I think will be an absolutely massive confidence boost to them, because we've seen them over the years with drivers like Richard Pashore, Felipe Drugovich be really, really impressive in this series, but to just get that first win off the ground with a driver who is new to the team, I think is so important, both for Gabriele Mini, but also for the wider team. Now only 1 point off the drivers' standings lead with Gabriele Mini. I know it's 2 rounds into the season. It doesn't really matter that much, but visually and psychologically, I think that'll be really important for them to be right there in the mix. I'd also say I'm really looking at, and I've already said this, but I'm really looking at Rodin, who do need to start executing in races some of that pace. I know it wasn't necessarily Martin Lloyd's fault that he was so far down when he retired, but it was Rodin's fault. It's a really silly mistake to not have all the tyres fitted before I think it was the 3-minute signal. It's when you've got a driver who's so quick, who's shown that pace all weekend, it's a very, very easy way to throw away all that pace. Alex Dunn again, it's a mistake in execution. We've seen how fast he is to go straight on at turn 17. We've seen drivers do that this weekend, but then can you spin the car around? It's quite big runoff area. Can you spin the car around? To go into the wall there was really, really unnecessary. So I think for Rodin, it'll be a case of regrouping, understanding, okay, we've got that pace. We don't need to take these kinds of risks. If they just finish 6th and 7th in the next feature race, that would be a positive result. That would get them off the ground if they didn't take quite so many risks. I'm also interested to see next time out in Montreal, how Colton Herta gets on. I think he's clearly got pace. He's shown that. I think he's only going to get better as this season goes on, finishing 8th yesterday. Clearly, even if he's not the fastest driver in these F2 cars yet, he's very adept at staying out of trouble. So I'm looking forward to seeing how he improves as well as the season goes on.
Yeah, I think I'd like to see a bit more from Invicta actually, because what I think we've seen from them is so far they've got one driver who's been really good in the sprints, one driver who's been really good in the features, in kind of Dirksen and Camera kind of swapping roles. You know, I don't know what quite needs to happen for them to get both cars running consistently at the front, but I think for their sake it definitely needs to happen, you know, because at some point Campos are going to start doing the same, and they need to kind of keep pace with the front, and I guess with the championship as well. You know, Dirksen, he's got so much pace in the sprints apparently from what we've been seeing. If he can convert that to feature length pace in qualifying, then I think they're going to be looking in a really, really good, strong position for Canada, and that's kind of what I think they need to be doing. I also think someone like Solov, if he can put a weekend together where he's like, you know, top 5 in both races, rather than, because so far he's won one race and then not soared in the other. I think what we need to see across the board for those guys who are going to be wanting to fight for the title come the end of the season is just get Canada right and get it executed well, as you said. You know, I think we those teams you mentioned, definitely a strong weekend will be really key for them, and the likes of Dunn and Stenstrom, because we know what they can produce. So I think consistency is really the name of the game in Canada, in terms of what I'm going to be looking out for these guys. But no, I think overall a hugely successful first weekend in North America for the championship, and a very, very exciting race on both days in different conditions. But of course, F2 wasn't the only action this weekend in the World of Feeder Series, as we also had the Eurocup 3 season opener over at Paul Ricard for their first 3 races of the year. And here to tell us more about it with his voice note, it is our very own Seb Tirado.
After taking 3 podiums in Eurocup 3's opening round, Paloma Motorsport's James Agosi leaves Le Castellet at the top of the drivers' standings. The American scored 52 points during the weekend and sits 13 ahead of Winter Series rival Keanu Alizari. In race 1, a stall from pole position for the high-tech driver shattered his chances from lights out and gave Agosi a prime opportunity to take advantage. He battled with René Lammers after an early safety car period and took the lead on lap 11 of 15, eventually going on to take victory ahead of the Dutch driver and Alex Powell, with Alizari only managing 7th at the flag. The reverse grid sprint race followed later that Saturday afternoon, and the story of the race was Christopher Fagali taking his first career win in single-seaters. The former Red Bull Junior took the lead from pole sitter and current Red Bull Junior Enzo Tarvanichkul on the opening lap, and didn't look back on his way to victory, even after having to deal with a safety car restart with 2 laps to go. Tarvanichkul finished P2, and Agosi rounded out the podium. MP Motorsport's Gianmarco Pradel began the final race of the weekend from pole, but only held onto the lead for a few hundred meters as Agosi swiped it from him into the first corner. The Australian's race then ended a lot earlier than he would have wanted, as he was forced to pull off the track at the end of the Mistral Straight during a safety car period. Once racing resumed, a fierce wheel-to-wheel battle for the lead began between Agosi and Alizari, which even resulted in an airborne moment for the Emirati driver. In the end, however, it was the reigning Spanish winter champion who came out on top in the battle. The podium was rounded out by Ian Ekmans, who inherited third after Powell was given a 5-second penalty for overtaking Lammers off the track. MP Motorsport's 2 podium finishes mean that they head into the next round as the team's championship leaders on 70 points, 5 ahead of Paloma Motorsport. Eurocup 3 returns on June 5th to 7th at Portimao in Portugal, where it will once again have its first of 3 rounds alongside Spanish F4.
Brilliant to hear from Seb there. Of course, he is our resident Eurocup 3 editor, so thank you very much to him. And for all of the results this weekend, make sure to check out the relevant pages on our website at feeditseries.net. But for now, that's all from us here on Race Recap. Before you go there, make sure to leave a like, comment, review, or follow on whatever social platform you're watching us on today. And a huge thank you of Martin as well for joining us on today's episode of Race Recap. But for now, my name has been Thomas Groves. You've been listening to Race Recap, brought to you by Feeder Series, and make sure to join Elliot on Thursday for another episode of Feeder Focus. Take care.